Hi, my name is Gretchen, and I'm the Community Director here at South Hills. We're so glad you chose to join us for Church Online today. If you're new with us, I'd love to invite you to pull out your phone and text the word CONNECT to 951-476-2550. When you do that, it'll pull up a couple of options to take a next step with us. You could speak with a pastor, ask some questions, share a prayer request, and many other things. One of our staff members would love to follow up with you this week. And before we get into the message, there's a few things I wanted to share that are happening at South Hills this week that we're super excited about. This last weekend, we were able to relaunch our kids ministry, and our children's pastors and team have been working so hard behind the scenes to create a safe place for your kids to come and have their very own worship experience during our 9 a.m. sunup service. If you've been waiting to come back to church until there was some form of childcare available, we totally get it, but now is the time, and we cannot wait to see you and your kids back here on campus. So head over to the Church Center app and RSVP your kiddos today. This month, we are partnering with Olive Crest, an organization that exists to help kids in rough living environments find safe and loving homes. And we want to provide them with welcome baskets and all the supplies they need when they move in. There's towels and bedding and toiletry items available, and we have a donation box that you can drop them in on a Sunday when you're here during our live services. If you're unable to attend, we also invite you to drop them off on a Sunday or on a Tuesday during the day. There's also an Amazon wish list with all the items that you could just send right from your home. To find the link for the Amazon wish list, you can visit Instagram and find the link in our bio, or you can look at the description in this video and find the link there as well. Lastly, our Discover 2 class is coming up next Sunday, the 27th at 1 p.m. We'll be meeting under the canopies on the lawn, and we hope you can join us. Discover 2 talks about the 4 spiritual disciplines that were practiced throughout church history and why they're still important for our spiritual life today. Head over to the Events tab in the Church Center app and you can RSVP for that event today. Thank you guys for tuning in and enjoy this week's message.
Bring it all to peace. The storm surrounding me, let it break. At your name still, call the sea to still, the rage in me to still every way. At your name, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, breathe, call these bones
Our lives are supposed to be stories, but mine mostly feels like fragments and flashes of things that don't fit together. How do I make sense of all these memories and moments? I can see the individual threads, tangled and twisted, but I'm not always sure how the dots connect. How did I get here, and where do I go from here? How do I make sense of my storyline?
Well, welcome once again to Church Online. My name is Adam, and I'm the campus pastor here at our South Hills Corona campus. And I'm so excited that you decided to jump in and join us for part 2 of this series we started last week called Storyline, about making sense of your story, of the story that you're living, of the story that we're all inside of. And I hope that you take some notes, scribble some things down that stand out to you, that are interesting to you, inspiring to you. Maybe they just feel challenging to you. Maybe you're like, I don't even know if I agree with that or believe in that, but it's worth thinking about, maybe talking about with some other people, hopefully the people in the brand new growth group that you've just joined. And so with all that said, if you are taking notes today, the title of my message is Milestones, Miracles, and Meaning. My oldest son, his name is Cohen, and he just turned 11 this last week. And he'd been talking about this for a long time. In fact, he'd been talking about it a lot, basically every day for 2 months straight. He made us very well aware that his dream for his 11th birthday was to go deep sea fishing. He's been watching all these fishing shows online. He's been having us watch them. He's saved up money, started a car wash business to buy himself a fishing pole, and got all ready, talked to everyone he knew that had ever gone fishing, figured out the friends he wanted to bring, got it all lined up. And so we went. It was him, and it was 3 of his friends, and it was a couple dads and one of my buddies, and we went on this fishing trip together. And 4 hours of fishing in, he hadn't caught anything. I mean, a huge bummer. I mean, again, this kid had been looking forward to this forever. And then within 10 minutes before we had to like all pull in our lines and turn back to shore, he caught something. And it ends up being this small little single fish. And if you know Cohen, he's kind of a reserved kid. And so he was trying to kind of mask like how excited he was. I didn't try that at all. I was relieved. Okay. We all were. Every single person on the boat that knew this kid was having a birthday and dreamed to come fishing and have a big catch was like, whew, he caught something. And why do we feel that way? Because it was his birthday, and birthdays are supposed to be magical. Everybody knows that. Like, things are supposed to go your way on your birthday. But, you know, things aren't always what they're supposed to be. Life doesn't always do what it's supposed to do. Like, don't you hate that? Like, there's nothing more annoying to me ever. But it's also completely undeniable. That, and stop me if you've heard this before, life isn't fair. And this is true on a lot of levels. It's not just that we don't always get what we want, it's that we don't even get what we deserve. The ancient Hebrew wisdom writer of Ecclesiastes says it this way, chapter 8, verse 14. In this life, good people are often treated as though they were wicked, and wicked people are often treated as though they were good. This is so meaningless. I mean, it's a little bit dark, but I mean, be honest. You ever thought that? You ever felt that? You ever said that? Like all of these great things are happening to the lives of people who are horrible people. They don't do good things. They don't treat people well. They try and get away with stuff. It's not fair. And then there's all these incredible people who work so hard, who are giving their best, who are trying to do their best, and it's just not working out. Like, what does it mean? It feels meaningless. I think we've all thought these things because it's tough for us to accept that life isn't linear. Our stories are not straight lines. They're tangled squiggles and scribbles with unpatterned positive and negative turns. The path and the pacing of our plot isn't at all predictable. The win and the loss columns, they don't often even out or even seem to fit a formula. And this right here is what makes life so incredibly exciting and also infuriating. Because I don't know if you're like me, I like guarantees. Okay, I want to know that if I do this, I'm going to get that every time. That everything is going to work out in the end because things ought to be fair and balanced. Except they're not. And I think the reason that we collectively choke on this concept is because our culture clings to a base belief in karma. Maybe you've heard of this before. Like it's this idea that everything you do comes back to you. That those who do good get good, and those who do bad get bad. That everyone ultimately gets what they deserve in the end. But this, which may surprise you, is not actually a Christian concept. In fact, it's rooted in Hinduism and Buddhism with a dash of modern vending machine consumerism mixed in for good measure. Christianity is based on the idea that the worst thing happened to the best person who didn't deserve it. That the perfect Christ was crucified. Christianity revolves around something that couldn't be further from karma. This idea that sometimes, even in the best stories, the good suffer and the evil succeed, which is hard to swallow because in our minds, it's not supposed to work that way, except it does. And honestly, it always has. Even Jesus echoes this idea to his followers. There's this moment in Matthew chapter 5, verse 45. He says, God gives his sunlight to both the evil and the good, and he sends rain on the just and the unjust alike. Maybe you hear that and you're thinking, I don't like that. That's not fair. It shouldn't be like that. And I've said the same sort of stuff myself. I mean, I don't know what your version of this is. Maybe it's something like, I've worked so hard for this place. They can't lay me off now. I gave so much of myself to this relationship. I mean, we've been through so much. Like I've sacrificed so much. Like they can't just walk away. Maybe it looks something like I did everything that I was asked to do. And so the situation has to work out, but it doesn't feel like maybe it's going to. I tried to always do the right thing by them. And so how could they do this to me? Or maybe it looks like it's been a really hard year, full of so much loss and disappointment. And I have been looking forward to this for so long. And it's my birthday. I can't not catch a fish. Except karma doesn't always kick in the way you want it to. And maybe in these sorts of moments, you find yourself whispering to yourself the words of the writer of Ecclesiastes, like, this is so meaningless. Just another way of saying, like, this is pointless. It's purposeless. I wonder if you don't just whisper that to yourself, if you shout it at God, if you're just like, God, you didn't do your job. Okay, you didn't hold up your end of the deal. I think we all do this. In fact, in these last 6 months of COVID, I think we've all definitely done this. But what if there were better ways of seeing our stories? Last week, when we started this series, I began unpacking this story in Genesis about this guy named Joseph, who was beaten and sold into slavery by his own brothers when he was just a teenager. And although he definitely didn't deserve it, like later he kind of looks back and he realizes that he may have done some things to trigger it. And so he's hauled off to Egypt and he's heartbroken. I mean, he loses everything that he's ever cared about in life. All his dreams feel like they're dead. But when he arrives in Egypt, things in his story almost appear like they're going to take this slight upturn. It's found in Genesis chapter 39. And in verse 1, it goes on to say this. When Joseph was taken to Egypt, he was purchased by Potiphar, an Egyptian officer, captain of the guard for the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. The Lord was with Joseph. So he succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master. Potiphar noticed this, and so he made Joseph his personal attendant. He put him in charge of the entire household and everything he owned. And if I'm Joseph, I'm thinking like, it is about time, okay? I'm not a bad person, all right? Maybe, sure, at times I've been a little bit selfish or naive or misguided, but like I'm trying so hard, okay? I was a kid. And now like I'm focused on serving and trusting and honoring God. And I have already experienced way more than my fair share of suffering. But that's behind me. Okay. That's over. Okay. And it has to be. Okay. I'm committed to do good. And so I'm gonna get good. God's obligated to make sure that my life turns out good, that good things come my way. And it all starts now because that's how it works. But you know, that's actually not how it works. And as it turns out, Joseph doesn't think anything like me, and that's not what happened in his story. Genesis chapter 39, verse 6 says this: Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man. Yes, he was. It's kind of a Bible-y way of saying like he was hot. It says verse 7, Potiphar's wife soon began to look lustfully at him. Come and sleep with me, she demanded. Now, interestingly, if you dig into the original Hebrew, sleeping actually wasn't what she had in mind at all. I know. It gets a little scandalous here. In the words of the prophet Sir Mix-a-Lot, she liked Hebrew boys and she cannot lie. I mean, she was all about it. Like she wanted to get some. She wanted to break off a piece. Verse 8. It says, but Joseph refused. Look, he told her, my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He's held back nothing from me. I mean, except you, because you're his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? I mean, it would be a great sin against God. But she kept putting pressure on Joseph day after day. I mean, guys, we've all been there, right? But he refused to sleep with her, and he kept out of her way as much as possible. One day, however, no one else was around when he went in to do his work, and she came and she grabbed him by his cloak, demanding, come on, sleep with me. And Joseph tore himself away, but he left his cloak in her hand as she ran from the house. This is getting intense, guys. Verse 13, when she saw that she was holding his cloak and he had fled, she called out to her servants. Look, she said, my husband has brought this Hebrew slave here to make fools of us. He came into my room to rape me, but I screamed. And when he heard me scream, he ran outside and he got away, but he left behind his cloak with me. She kept the cloak with her until her husband came home and she told him her story. Potiphar was furious when he heard his wife's story, and that's exactly what it was. A story was a total lie. And so he took Joseph and he threw him into the prison where the king's prisoners were held. And there he remained 4 years. Now, I think like this is the point where a lot of people would abandon their faith. But that's not what Joseph does. Instead, he goes the opposite direction. Like he doubles down on his faith. In fact, he refuses to play the victim and he looks for ways to leverage his suffering to relate to and to relieve the suffering of other people. I mean, it's almost impossible to comprehend because he'd already been through so much. But it says this in verse 21, the Lord was with Joseph in the prison and showed him his faithful love. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners and over everything that had happened in the prison. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. Now, for some of you, that sounds like a confusing sentence. I mean, you're thinking, how successful can he be? He's still a slave in prison. And yet, here's where I think the story Joseph tells himself about who God is and how God works empowers him to live a better story despite his circumstances. He believes that the evidence of God's grace isn't that he eradicates my suffering, but that he empowers me to survive my suffering. I mean, I don't know about you, but I look at this Joseph story and I think it's a miracle that he survived what he went through. I think it's supernatural that he wasn't a shell of a person after all that. That blow after blow and betrayal after betrayal somehow softened his heart instead of hardening it towards others. That instead of becoming like detached from other people, he invested more into them. That instead of becoming callous, he becomes more compassionate. The more rejection he weathers, the more emotionally healthy he becomes, not less. What is that? I mean, I wonder when I look at this story, what if the way we've defined a miracle is way too narrow? Like, what if God's most impressive healings weren't blind eyes and broken legs? What if God's most mind blowing miracles were largely invisible and internal? What if the biggest proof of the power and presence of God in someone's life isn't that they get what they want, but that they sacrificially serve others when they don't? What if God is always enacting miracles on your behalf, but you don't embrace them because they're not the ones you want? Now, this is a paradigm shift. Joseph sees his story different than most of us see ours. Now, I'm guessing that probably a lot of you have heard this term post-traumatic stress. It's like the way that suffering damages or limits a person's self-concept, stunting them emotionally or like propelling them into self-destructive coping mechanisms to temporarily numb or navigate the pain of their life. What we don't hear about as much is something called post-traumatic growth. And it's the way that those who are forced to face unwanted suffering uncover as a result of it inner strength and skills and sides of themselves they never even knew were there. There's this one expert researcher that I was reading this past week that said on this matter that in some cases, those that he was studying who had suffered severely seemed almost inoculated against minor stressors that panicked or paralyzed other people because these people had this experiential belief that they could recover and repair and reorient themselves no matter what happened to them. And if they wouldn't have gone through that, they wouldn't see their future like this. And I wondered as I read that, like, maybe this is part of what the Apostle Paul meant when he said in Romans chapter 5, verse 3, we can rejoice when we run into problems and trials, for we know that they help us develop endurance. And endurance develops strength of character, and character strengthens our confident hope of salvation. I had a friend who told me one time when I was in the middle of something really rough. He said, you know what happens on the day the thing you fear most actually happens to you? You realize that you're still here. You're still alive. It devastated you, but it didn't destroy you. You suddenly realize in that moment that you are much stronger than you thought. And then maybe you start asking yourself, what am I going to do with all this secret strength I never knew I had? I think about this a lot. I always like that. And I wonder, like, what about you? And when you think back at that moment in your life, maybe it was a long time ago, maybe it was literally just last week or last month or just this entire insane year. And you look at the situation, you think like it didn't work out like you thought. Like what was supposed to happen didn't happen. Your worst nightmare materialized and it was bad. It was so painful. It hurt worse than anything you could ever imagine. But at the same time, you're still here. You're stronger than you thought you were. So what are you going to do with all that secret strength you never even knew you had? Yeah, you survived the unthinkable. Like you are a miracle. And so now what? I want to encourage you, like, don't waste what happened. I wonder if you've ever noticed that, like, when you dig into the noble pursuits of inspiring people, they're often rooted in some sort of personal pain. I wonder if you've ever talked to somebody or watched a documentary or gotten a chance to interview somebody that you see as an absolute hero because of how they've invested their life, because of how they've chosen to tell their story. The conversations usually go something like this. You ask them, like, how in the world did you end up doing this? And then they tell you a story about something that happened to them when they were a kid, or their first year of college, or during the tail end of their first marriage. They tell you about rejection or failure or falling short or getting hurt. And they'll talk about wanting to help people in the same sort of situation, to educate them or empower them or encourage them to make sure the thing that they experienced isn't the experience that other people walk away with. And why is that? Why is it that so many people who are doing amazing things with their lives point back to these painful moments? I think it's because ultimately calling isn't found, it's formed. And it's often formed in the fires of suffering. When you intimately know a certain kind of pain yourself, you become passionate about alleviating it for someone else. And why would those people listen to you? Because you've been there. You see, pain is a passport to places you wouldn't have had influence in otherwise. And isn't that true for you? When you're going through something that is absolutely gut-wrenching, don't you kind of roll your eyes at some advice giver that has never been there or experienced that? And yet, at the same time, isn't there part of you who leans into the person that you know somehow survived the suffering that you're staring down right now? This was definitely true for Joseph, whose unwanted experiences culminated in him designing and overseeing a food distribution plan during a drought for refugees in neighboring countries for the most powerful nation on earth at that time. What a crazy chapter of his insane story. Think of the role that all the pain in his life played in him getting to that point. I mean, I think of, like, how does he end up in that place? How does that end up being a part of his life's purpose? Like, why would anyone even listen to Joseph? They probably wouldn't if he hadn't lived in and among them for so long and earned credibility. And how would they have even understood his insight or the things that he had to say if he didn't learn to speak fluent Egyptian on his years as a slave? And how would he have understood organization and strategy and leadership if he didn't humble himself and devote himself to serving his slave master and the prison warden as well as he possibly could? And how would he have known the desperate plight of refugees who are starving and how scared they would be to enter in and ask for help in a place that they didn't understand the customs of the language if he wasn't himself a refugee in a country where he didn't know the customs and the language at one point in time? And how would he have known anything about crops and grain storage and how to distribute and save and secure this stuff if he hadn't worked in the fields with his abusive brothers day after day after day, knowing they hated him? I could go on and on and on. Every moment of pain in his life pointed toward this future purpose, because God's heart is that nothing that you have suffered through would be wasted on you. And I wonder if this could be some of what the psalmist meant when he wrote in Psalm chapter 23, verse 4. You're probably familiar with this if you've read much scripture or listened to much Coolio in the 90s. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. I think the meaning of this verse is that there is an awareness that comes over us that I'm going to survive this. I'm going to make it to the other side of this. God himself is with me. I don't have to be afraid that this is going to be how the story ends, or that I'm going to be stuck in this moment of suffering forever. I can trust that there is a miracle about to unfold, and maybe it's not going to happen around me, but it's going to happen within me. I think I might just be about to discover that I am much stronger than I thought. And so what am I going to do with this secret strength I didn't even know I had? It's this way of interpreting events in your life that changes how you live. I think it's the reason that Joseph lives the story that he does. Every time his life ended up going in a different direction than he thought, but I think he consoled himself with the fact that the filter that was governing his story wasn't karma. It's something much better. It's the grace of God. I think he genuinely believed that the evidence of God's grace isn't that God was going to eradicate all of his suffering, but that God was going to empower him to survive it and to channel it into service of other people. And that service was going to bring meaning into his story. I wonder today if you look at your story and you were tempted to assume that because things aren't going the direction you thought they were, that maybe it's all meaningless. And I wonder if maybe it's not meaningless. Maybe you've just misunderstood the miracle. You were looking for God to change something out here, and all the while God has been doing work in here. I wonder if you allowed that reality, that truth, to shape your story, if your storyline might shift. And that's what I want to pray. I want to pray into your life that as you look inside yourself, as you survive these moments of suffering that you never wanted, never asked for, that it would produce in you a sort of secret strength, an endurance, a sense of character that wakes you up to who you are and what God has for you up ahead. Would you just bow your head with me wherever you find yourself today? God, thank you so much for the life that you've given us, for the story that you've given us an opportunity to live. There are times when we are so confused by the twists and turns that our story takes. But God, we know that you have perspective that we don't. And God, we want to trust that there is a miracle that you want to enact on our behalf. Sometimes that miracle isn't getting us out of something, but helping us get through something. And God, I pray that you would enable us to see your grace in our darkest moments, and that God, we would channel our pain into your purposes, expanding your kingdom and showing your love to other people. God, we love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, hey, I just want to say, if you prayed this prayer with me today, and maybe praying is not a consistent thing you do, maybe this idea of pushing pause on your life and just opening your heart to God and inviting him to come into your life and give you his perspective and his power, it is a totally foreign concept. But there was something about today, whether it was the message or the story, maybe just something that God is doing in you independently, and there's a stirring in you. We want to hear about it because we believe that God speaks to us through these little moments and whispers. And we want to help you take whatever next steps forward in your faith journey. And we can't do that unless you let us know that you've made a decision to really follow God in your life. And you can do that by simply filling out a Connect card electronically. The way you do that is to text the word Connect to the number on the bottom of your screen. A Connect card will be automatically sent back to you. You can fill that out, check any boxes that apply to you, including the one that says, I said yes to Jesus. And one of our team members will follow back up with you this week and help you to take whatever next steps are best for you in your journey. And the last thing I want to invite all of you to do with me here today is to give. Some of you that have been watching for a long time, you're like, I'm not surprised that that is what you're asking right now. And the reason why I bring this up every single week is because I think it's healthy for us to get a weekly reminder that our ultimate provider in life is not our job, is not a bank account, it's not our profession, it's God. And in fact, everything that we have in life that is good comes from God. And in addition to that, it also enables us to fuel ministry in our local community. Your regular giving is what empowers us to serve our community, to provide online and in-person services, to teach discipleship classes, and to just do practical things for those that live in our community. And in fact, it's regularly transforming people's lives. And I know that may sound like a generic statement, which is why I want to tell you a very specific story. There were these two women that they somehow found our services, probably through one of you sharing a link. They've been watching so much online that they're like, man, we should try and go to a church. There was a church that was like a little bit closer to them than our particular campus. So they're like, let's just check that out. And they did not connect. They're like, I'm sure this place is great and fine for the people that are here, but like, I didn't feel like it spoke to me in my life and where I was at. And so they decided that they were going to show up here and attend in person with us. They were a little bit nervous, but they said that as soon as they arrived, they felt welcomed and included. There were people in masks that were saying hi, that it showed them a place to sit, that were so excited to see them. And in fact, it was such a profound experience for them that they immediately signed up to attend our Discover 2 class on September 27th and to join a young adults growth group. And they even decided to give for the very first time. Now, those of you that are keeping track of next steps, it's like 17 next steps, all in the first time that they showed up. Your giving allows us to continue to produce online content as well as in-person services that are bringing hope, the hope of Jesus, to people that really desperately need it. People that you don't even realize you're impacting with your giving. And I think it's beautiful because a lot of times the online service becomes a first step for people to engage with who God is. And I just want to say thank you for continuing to give, for believing in our vision as a church, and for making stories like this possible. I love you guys. I'm praying for you. I'm hoping that throughout this storyline series, you are being inspired to maybe shift the way you're telling your story and allow God to point you in a direction that you can be proud of in your life. I can't wait to share part 3 with you next week. Love you guys. God bless.
Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed and learned something today. And if you've been wondering what it might look like if you said yes to Jesus in your life, I invite you to text the word CONNECT to fill out our online Connect card to 951-476-2550. Someone from our I Said Yes team would love to connect with you and make sure you feel supported and resourced as you take this important step in your faith journey. We also invite you to share today's message with your friends and family through Facebook, YouTube, or Vimeo. And as always, follow us on all the social media platforms so you can stay connected with what's going on in South Hills throughout the week. Be sure to RSVP for all of the upcoming events on our Church Center app. And we'll see you next week or maybe even tonight at our 6 p.m. service.